everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to film my rankings and review video for the Booktube prize for the past semifinals round that just ended at the end of July. So the results have already been announced, and we already know what books have gone on to the finals. There's 6 books in each category, fiction and nonfiction. I have been reading exclusively in nonfiction this year, and I did have Group B in the semifinals. So I will be talking about those 6 books, and I'm going to rank them. I'm just going to talk about them in the order in which I ranked them, from number 6, which was my least favorite, to number 1, which was my most favorite. And of course, the top 3 books are the books that I voted to go through to the next round. And you'll see how successful I was at the end. I will also leave a link down below to the Booktube Prize's channel and website so that you can get more background information on the Booktube Prize if you don't know. It's a prize that is judged by other booktubers and members of the Booktube community, and it is ably run by Robert over at the channel Pages and Pores. So let's just get to it. My number 6 book in my group, so like I said, this is nonfiction Group B, was the book Strangers to Ourselves, Unsettled Minds, and the Stories That Make Us by Rachel Aviv. Now, this book just did not work for me at all. I thought that it was very lacking in a central purpose. Like, it was very unclear from the book what the author's point was. I never felt like her the argument that she was trying to make, if there was such a thing, ever came through to me. So it read to me like a collection of essays about mental health. And the case studies that she discussed were interesting, but I just, because there was nothing linking them together for me, I had no understanding of why she had assembled these particular cases in that particular order. It just did not work for me. I think that my guess is that she was trying to make some kind of case about how early diagnosis of mental health conditions or disorders, put people in labeled boxes that they then find it very difficult to break out of later in life. But not all of the stories that she tells actually support that thesis, so I don't really know. There also seemed to be some arguments she was making between talk therapy and prescription medication, but again, unclear to me what point it was she was trying to make. So for me, the book simply did not work, and that is why it was in the 6th position. In number 5 was the book Sandy Hook, An American Tragedy and the Battle for Truth by Elizabeth Williamson. And I will say both the previous book I just talked about and this book, the previous book was a library book that I read in return. I own Sandy Hook, but as an ebook. I read it on my Kindle. And the reason why it's in 5th place is not because it's poorly written. I think it's well written. It's a journalistic take on the school shooting that happened at Sandy Hook in Connecticut. But it's mostly about the conspiracy theories that arose after Sandy Hook, which stated that Sandy Hook was a false flag event, that it was a government-created event. It never really happened, that the children weren't really killed by a gunman. And those myths and lies were perpetrated by primarily by Alex Jones of InfoWars, and were then spread online. And that the way that online culture is set up right now, it's very easy for these types of lies and falsehoods to be spread around and without any checks and balances. And it becomes very, very difficult for the people that are impacted by that. So the problem that I have with this book are the first 3 chapters are rough. In these first 3 chapters, I cried so hard that I gave myself a headache. I would read a chapter and be crying so hard, I would have to put the book down and step away from it for several days, and then pick it back up, read another chapter, cry so hard, step back down. I do not enjoy reading books that make me cry that hard. I wish that the author had been able to tell her story without, I felt like that the book went a little too hard on the emotional side of what it was like for the parents to lose their children. Not that any of that is Like, I can't even imagine how horrific that was for people that were impacted. It was horrific. It was horrific, and we all know it was horrific. And I don't need any extra dramatic telling of that to make it feel horrific to me. I already feel horrified by it. I am already saddened and disgusted by the fact that this country has done nothing to solve our gun problems. Like, all of that exists in the world. Like, I don't need a book to like manipulate me into feeling even worse about it than I already feel. So that's why the very first part of this book, I almost put this book down and didn't finish it, which I have never done before for the Booktube Prize. I have always finished my books. But I didn't think I could physically read the book. I thought that I was just not going to be able to read it. But luckily, after that first 3 chapters, it goes away from describing the events of the shooting and what that impact was on the parents, and talks more about the rise of conspiracy theorists and how our online structures promote and allow for these things to happen, and specifically about Alex Jones and InfoWars and the evil that this man puts out into the world, and how the parents and the families of those murdered at Sandy Hook fought back against him, and the court cases that were brought against Alex Jones and InfoWars for the lies that he was spreading about that. And it's a lot of talk about, you know, online bullying and online harassment and how that happens. And Sandy Hook was really the beginning of what we now find to be commonplace, I think. But Sandy Hook was really the first big event where this sort of online lie spreading really impacted a big event like that. So yeah, I don't think it was a bad book. I just think that personally I found it very, very difficult to read, and that impacted my feeling about the book overall. It was just not a book that I wanted to read, and it was a book that I found difficult to read. I think Elizabeth Williamson did a good job of like investigating the whole thing, but I think that she also leaned a little too heavily on the emotional impact side of that. So yeah. And then in number 4 is The Escape Artist, The Man Who Broke Out of Auschwitz to Warn the World by Jonathan Friedland. I listened to an audiobook from the library, and it is really well told. It is, in fact, this book, if in any other group, probably I would have put in the top 3. I'm not a fan of Holocaust stories, but this particular book I thought was really well told and approached it from a slightly different angle, at least at the end, than what I'm used to. So this is a story about this man who, I can't remember his name, but he, at a very young age, as a teenager, was captured by the Nazis and put into prison camps. And he, in fact, broke out of the first prison camp that he was put in, and then he was captured again, and he was then taken to Auschwitz. And this book just tells his story of what it was like for him, what the things that he endured in the concentration camp, the people that he encountered, what it was really like in the camp, and then how he escaped, like the plans that were made and how he physically escaped from the concentration camp with another person. And then the afterward from that is basically the second half of the book is what happened to him after he escaped. Like, he escapes with this other man from the concentration camp, and they attempt to tell the world what is happening and warn the Hungarian Jews, like, to not go along with what the Nazis are trying to do, like to resist. And because of what happened to him afterwards and how he was not believed, this man, he became very bitter in his old age, and he sort of continued to rail against governments and the Jewish community, and particularly the Jewish community in Israel, about the fact that they didn't listen to him and that all these deaths could have been avoided. And so that was very interesting, and learning about how the sort of the Jewish leadership didn't respond in the way that you might expect them to what was being done by the Nazis. That was very interesting and very different from what I had read before. So because of that, and because of the very narrative style, it reads very much like an adventure story. It was a very good audiobook to listen to. It was read by the author, Jonathan Friedland. So definitely, if you're interested in World War II nonfiction, I would recommend that one. And then in third place, I read His Name is George Floyd by Robert Samuels and Toulouse Olaranapia. And they are both Washington Post reporters. And they followed after George Floyd was murdered and the protests that happened, Black Lives Matter and His Name is George Floyd and all that sort of thing. They followed many of the family members and friends involved for like quite a long period after Floyd's death. And this is the book that came out of that. And so it is a mixture of biography and like historical context around the systemic racism problem in the US. And so the book not only tells the story of George Floyd, it also tells the story of systemic racism and how just because we emancipated the enslaved people after the Civil War, we did not provide them with an equal society to be a part of. So it talks about how, you know, the problems with the education system, the problems with the housing system, the problem with the economy, the problems with the criminal justice system and the policing system, all those different aspects of our culture and how that impacts an individual Black person in the real world. And then uses George Floyd's life as sort of a case study to help you understand how it was that George Floyd got to the point where he was murdered by a police officer. You know, it is not a hagiography of George Floyd. It is not like these authors are not putting him on a pedestal and saying that he was a perfect person. Nobody is a perfect person. We are all human people. We all do things that perhaps upon reflection we would have chosen not to do. And George Floyd was no different. But he was a person. He was a human person in the world, and he did not deserve what happened to him. And this book makes abundantly clear that there were so many things that were impacting Floyd's life that he had no control over. He had no decision to make about it. And how that could happen to any individual Black person, not just George Floyd, but any individual Black person. And I thought that the way that this story was told was really innovative and engaging. And I really, really liked this book. I thought it was very, very well done. And it very much puts a human face on a lot of the topics that maybe we, as a liberal American, you talk about, you know, like the injustices in the policing system, the injustices in the education system, the injustices in our economy and our employment situations. All of these things, if you look at them through the lens of an individual human being, become even more enraging. So yeah, I thought this was a really well done book, and I very much appreciated the work that these two authors did to tell this story in the way that they told it. And then number 2 is a book that I did read, in fact, in a previous round, and that is Under the Skin by Linda Villarosa. This is a book about Black Americans and how the healthcare system in the United States is killing them, basically because they are treated differently, and also because systemic racism causes increased health problems in that population. And I thought this book was incredible. I think it should be required reading, and particularly the sections on Black motherhood and mortality rates among Black women who give birth, the problems that are encountered by Black women as they just are normally having babies. You know, like this is not an unusual thing for people to have to go through, but yet the rates of problems for the mom and for the baby are so much higher in Black women than they are in other segments of the population in the United States. And I think Villarosa does an excellent job of laying out why that is. And she tackles some other topics, and I've heard criticisms that the book maybe gets too far afield in some of those other topics, but I thought it was great, and I enjoyed those other topics just as much as I enjoyed the women in childbirth type stuff. So I thought it was very, very excellently done and really worth your time. If you have not yet read Under the Skin, I would highly recommend it. And then number one, surprising no one, I put An Immense World by Ed Yong, which of course I did read earlier this year, and is an excellent science book about the ways that other living creatures other than humans perceive the world. We are so used to describing things and looking at things and thinking about things the way that we perceive them as humans, that we do not fully understand how other living creatures perceive the world. So this book goes into great detail about how other species see, hear, touch, smell, how they use other things that we can't, like infrared or ultraviolet light, how they can communicate using vibrations. There's other senses that other species have that we simply can't perceive. And the book really does a great job describing all of that. And he just describes like literally hundreds of animals and the different ways in which they perceive the world. And I thought it was fascinating. And I think Ed Yong is a wonderful storyteller. And yes, this book does have a lot of science in it. And I know that people have said that they didn't like it as much because there was so much science and it became overwhelming in its science-ness. But I glory in the science-ness of this book. And I think Ed Yong is the perfect person to tell these stories because he is such a great communicator of science information. So I absolutely love that book. I would really love to see it win the whole prize this year. And yeah, that couldn't be anywhere but in my number one spot. So how did I do on picking? I got one wrong. So I had voted for An Immense World and His Name is George Floyd to go through to the next round, and they did. But I had put The Escape Artist in my number 4th position, and that did also make it through. I am very sad that Under the Skin did not make it through because I think that book is really excellent. And then the other 3 books that made it through to the final round are My Fourth Time We Drowned, Eating to Extinction, and Paradise Falls. And I had not read Eating to Extinction or Paradise Falls when the round started. I have since read Paradise Falls, so I have only left to read Eating to Extinction to finish this year's Booktube prize and to submit my rankings. So I will be back at the end of September, beginning of October, to give you another rundown of my rankings and reviews for the final round of the Booktube prize. I hope that I have convinced you to pick up some of these books if you have not yet read them. If you have read them, let me know which ones were your favorites out of this group of 6. I would love to know. I hope you're all doing well and finding some great books to read. I will talk to you later.